Good day, everyone. I am teacher Sulin Rodrigues. I hope all of you are fine and keeping in good health by the grace of God. Today I am doing English Unit 3, Chapter 3, titled Stephen Hawking. Now, Stephen Hawking, who died on the 14th of March 2018, was a renowned British scientist whose greatest works revolved around cosmology, the theory of relativity, and quantum mechanics. You will be studying about his life, his works, and his illness during this lesson. Now, this lesson can be divided into two parts. The first part, which speaks about the books written by him or co-written by him, and the second part of the lesson deals with his illness. I will now read the lesson part by part and then explain it to you. Stephen Hawking was born on January 8, 1942, is a British scientist, professor, and author who has done groundbreaking work in physics and cosmology, and whose books have helped to make science accessible to everyone. At the age of 21, while studying cosmology at the University of Cambridge, he was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or ALS. Part of his life story was depicted in the 2014 film The Theory of Everything. The word groundbreaking means doing something that has never been done before or doing something innovative. The word cosmology means the study of the universe. Accessible means easy to get to, or easy to approach, or easy to understand. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or ALS is a disease where nerve cells break down, causing the muscles to weaken, and this in turn impacts physical functioning of the body. Diagnosed means identifying the nature of an illness by examining the symptoms of that illness. Depicted means shown or revealed. Over the years, Stephen Hawking has written or co-written a total of 15 books. A few of the most noteworthy include: in 1988, Hawking catapulted to international prominence with the publication of A Brief History of Time. The short, informative book became an account of cosmology for the masses and offered an overview of space and time, the existence of God, and the future. The work was an instant success, spending more than 4 years atop the London Sunday Times bestseller list. Since its publication, it has sold millions of copies worldwide and been translated into more than 40 languages. Catapult means was pushed into, was moved into at a very fast pace. Prominence means to become important or to become famous. The phrase an account of means gives information about. The phrase an overview of means to give a brief explanation about something or to give a summary about something. A brief history of time also wasn't as easy to understand as some had hoped. So in 2001, Hawking followed up his book with The Universe in a Nutshell, which offered a more illustrated guide to cosmology's big theories. The word illustrated means to provide an explanation using diagrams and pictures. In 2005, Hawking authored the even more accessible A Briefer History of Time, which further simplified the original work's core concepts and touched upon the newest developments in the field like string theory. Core means central or basic or the most fundamental and important concept. The phrase touched upon means to briefly talk about or to give a brief account of or a summary about something. The writer begins this lesson by telling us that Stephen Hawking was a renowned scientist who has done innovative work in the field of cosmology, that is, the study of the universe, in spite of suffering from this grave illness, that is, ALS. He then goes on to talk about the various books written or co-written by Stephen Hawking. The first book that was published in 1988 was titled A Brief History of Time, which gave information on various aspects of the universe. And the book gave a summary of space and time and the existence of God and the future. This book made him very famous all over the world. In fact, this book gained so much popularity that for 4 years in a row, it continued to remain on the London Sunday Times bestseller list. That book even sold millions of copies all over the world and was even translated into 40 different languages. But there was one little drawback. This book was not so easy to understand. So, Stephen Hawking published a more simpler version of his first book, titled The Universe in a Nutshell. This second book that he published was a more simpler version of this first book of his. The second book explained the basic concepts of the first book. The important theories that were there in the first book were now made much more simpler using diagrams and pictures. And then in 2005, he published an even more simplified version of this first book so that his theories could be more easily understood even by common people. This third book briefly even talked about the latest developments in the field of cosmology, like the string theory, which was a new development that had come up in the field of cosmology. Now, what is this string theory? It's a theory which deals with changes in the dimensions of particles in space, which would enable those particles to get propagated or travel through space at a great pace, at a great speed. We move on. Together, these three books, along with Hawking's own research and papers, articulate the physicist's personal search for science's holy grail, a single unifying theory that can combine cosmology, which is the study of the big, with quantum mechanics, which is the study of the small, to explain how the universe began. It's this kind of ambitious thinking that has allowed Hawking, who claims he can think in 11 dimensions, to lay out some big possibilities for humankind. He is convinced that time travel is possible and that humans may indeed colonize other planets in the future. The word articulate means to express very fluently or to express very coherently and logically. It could also mean to talk in detail about something. Holy Grail is an idiomatic expression over here, which means or refers to something that is much sought after, but is very difficult to get or very difficult to achieve. Ambitious thinking is to have an attitude where one is determined to succeed. Dimension is a measurable unit of physical things like length, breadth, volume, time, space, etc. Compatible means able to coexist together. In September 2010, Hawkins spoke against the idea that God could have created the universe in his book, The Grand Design. Hawkins previously argued that belief in a creator could be compatible with modern scientific theories. His new work, however, concluded that the Big Bang was the inevitable consequence of the laws of physics and nothing more. Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing, Hawkins said. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists, why we exist. Inevitable means bound to happen. The Grand Design was Hawkins' first major publication in almost a decade. Within his new work, Hawkins set out to challenge Sir Isaac Newton's belief that the universe had to have been designed by God simply because it could not have been born from chaos. It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue touch paper and set the universe going, Hawkins said. Chaos means complete disorder. To invoke means to call on or to depend on. This idiomatic expression, to light the blue touch paper, means to awaken or excite so that something can be created. Now, all the books that Stephen Hawking wrote and all the research that he did and all the theories he propounded were all in the quest or in the search to find that one theory that could combine the study of the universe and everything in it. That is the study of huge things, big things, using the knowledge of small things, small particles, atoms. That is, according to him, understanding the physical aspects of the universe like light, distance, gravity, which are huge concepts, by using our knowledge of smaller things, by using our knowledge of how atoms and electrons and other particles that go on to make up these things, how they work, how they function. It was this kind of an attitude and determination that Stephen Hawking had that helped him to succeed and allowed him to be able to understand how different dimensions in the universe work and how they can be used and how one dimension can be connected with another to make it possible for human beings to do impossible things like traveling back and forth in time and even traveling at great speeds so that we could go and live on other planets. Earlier, he was trying to support Isaac Newton's theory that God designed and created the universe based on the simple logical test that, or the simple logical theory that the universe could not have been created out of nothing. That something or someone had to start doing things that could have continued this sequence of creation. But then he came up with another theory because of the detailed studying that he was doing. And in 2010, he wrote another book titled The Grand Design, in which he put forth this theory that Isaac Newton's theory was incorrect. He said that we didn't need a God to get excited or to awaken and start creating the universe. In that, nothing that was there before, there were dimensions like gravity that could use antimatter like small particles to start creating a chain reaction which finally resulted in the Big Bang. And this further encouraged or propelled bigger things in the universe to be created, like stars, planets, black holes, etc., and even human beings. We now come to that part of the lesson which talks about Stephen Hawking's illness. At the age of 21, Stephen Hawking was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. In a very simple sense, the nerves that controlled his muscles were shutting down. At the time, doctors gave him 2.5 years to live. Hawkins first began to notice problems with his physical health while he was at Oxford. On occasion, he would trip and fall or slur his speech. He didn't look into the problem until 1963 during his first year at Cambridge. For the most part, Hawking had kept these symptoms to himself. But when his father took notice of the condition, he took Hawkins to see a doctor. For the next 2 weeks, the 21-year-old college student made his home at a medical clinic where he underwent a series of tests. Slur means to speak indistinctly or unclearly. They took a muscle sample for my arm, stuck electrodes into me, and injected some radio-opaque fluid into my spine and watched it going up and down with x-rays as they tilted the bed, he once said. After all that, they didn't tell me what I had, except that it was not multiple sclerosis and that I was a typical case. Multiple sclerosis is a disease involving damage to nerve cells, and this in turn leads to breakdown in many body functions simultaneously. Atypical means a rare or an unusual thing. Eventually, however, doctors did diagnose Hawken with the early stage of ALS. It was devastating news for him and his family. But a few events prevented him from becoming completely despondent. The first of these came while Hawken was still in the hospital. There he shared a room with a boy suffering from leukemia. Relative to what his roommate was going through, Hawken later reflected, his situation seemed more tolerable. Not long after he was released from the hospital, Hawken had a dream that he was going to be executed. He said this dream made him realize that there were still things to do with his life. Despondent means to lose all hope or to be filled with despair. Relative to means in comparison with. Devastating means to be greatly distressed. Leukemia is blood cancer. Now, when Stephen Hawking was 21 years old, he began realizing that all was not well with him physically. He would suddenly lose control over his leg muscles and trip and fall down. Or he would lose control over his facial muscles and mouth, and his speech would slur. It would become indistinct and unclear, and people couldn't understand what he was saying for just a little bit of time. But he ignored this problem that he was facing till it got so bad that it became easily noticeable. And his father saw this and then took him to a doctor. After a series of tests, all that the doctors told him was that he had an unusual or a rare illness, but they could not tell him what he was suffering from because they could not diagnose what he was suffering from. Finally, after a lot of tests, the doctors could find out about his condition, and they realized that he was in the early stages of ALS. It was very upsetting for him and his family. But there were two incidents that took place which changed the way he perceived his situation. One happened at the hospital where he was. There was this other boy who was going through a very bad time because he was suffering from leukemia. He was in great pain. And Stephen Hawking felt that at least he was not suffering like that boy. So he felt that his situation was much better. And then later on, when he went home, he had a dream one day where he dreamt that he was going to die suddenly. That incident made him realize that there were a lot of things that he had to accomplish in a very short span of time, because remember, the doctors had told him he had just around 2.5 years to live. So he wanted to do a lot of things within that short space of time, and that got him working very seriously on whatever it is he wanted to achieve. In a sense, Hawkins' disease helped him become the noted scientist he is today. Before the diagnosis, Hawkins hadn't always focused on his studies. Before my condition was diagnosed, I had been very bored with life, he said. There had not seemed to be anything worth doing. With a sudden realization that he might not even live long enough to earn his PhD, Hawking poured himself into his work and research. Noted means famous or well known. Poured himself into means devoted himself completely to. As physical control over his body diminished, he'd be forced to use a wheelchair by 1969. The effects of his disease started to slow down. Over time, however, Hawkins' ever expanding career was accompanied by an ever worsening physical state. By the mid 1970s, the Hawking family had taken in one of Hawkins' graduate students to help manage his care and work. He could still feed himself and get out of bed, but virtually everything else required assistance. In addition, his speech had become increasingly slurred so that only those who knew him well could understand him. In 1985, he lost his voice for good following a tracheotomy. The resulting situation required 24 hours nursing care for the acclaimed physicist. Diminished means to become less or to reduce. The phrase for good means forever or permanently. Tracheotomy is a surgery where an incision is made into the trachea. Acclaimed means noteworthy or famous. It also put in peril Hawkins' ability to do his work. The predicament caught the attention of a California computer programmer who had developed a speaking program that could be directed by head or eye movement. The invention allowed Hawking to select words on a computer screen that were then passed through a speech synthesizer. At the time of its introduction, Hawking, who still had use of his fingers, selected his words with a handheld clicker. Today, with virtually all control of his body gone, Hawking directs the program through a cheek muscle attached to a sensor. Peril means sudden and grave danger. The word predicament means a difficult or an unpleasant situation. A sensor is a device which detects or measures or records the slightest difference in the sensory organs. Now, on the one hand, Stephen Hawking was becoming famous and doing very well in his career and coming up with great theories in the field of quantum mechanics and in the field of cosmology. While on the other hand, his health was deteriorating very rapidly. He could hardly walk, so now he was forced to use a wheelchair. Because he was paralyzed neck downwards, now a graduate student had to assist him with his work. His speech became so slurred when he lost control of his muscles neck down. So, a, a tracheotomy had to be done. And through the incision made in his trachea, he would be fed now. So this was how bad his health was deteriorating to. Now he even lost his voice after this tracheotomy. So now he could not even dictate to his assistant whatever he wanted him to write down about his work and about his theories. So this now hampered his work. This put a barrier on his work. This predicament that he was facing, or this difficult situation that he was facing, was noticed by a computer programmer. And this programmer then came up with a design, which was a speaking program specially made for Stephen Hawking, where Stephen Hawking could just use the movement of his eyes or the movement of his fingers initially to do this program, to work this program. So now Stephen Hawking, using this program, could select words on his computer, which would then pass through a speech synthesizer and become spoken words. This is how Stephen Hawking began communicating with his assistants. Later, when he lost all control over his body and he could not even move his fingers, this program was modified to work using movement of a muscle in the cheek. We come to the last part of this lesson. Through the program and the help of assistants, Stephen Hawking has continued to work at a prolific rate. His work has included numerous scientific papers, of course, but also information for the non-scientific community. Hawking's health, of course, remains a constant concern, a worry that was heightened in 2009 when he failed to appear at a conference in Arizona because of a chest infection. In April, Hawking, who had already announced he was retiring after 30 years from the post of Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at Cambridge, was rushed to the hospital for being what university officials described as gravely ill. It was later announced that he was expected to make a full recovery. Now, prolific means at a great pace, at a great rate, or huge amounts. The phrase a constant concern means continually occurring. The phrase was heightened means grew more intense. Now, in spite of all these health constraints and health issues that Stephen Hawking faced, he published as many as 15 books and did a lot of research with the help of his assistants on various very difficult and very important theories on quantum mechanics. He was at the post of Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at the Cambridge University for 30 long years. And in 2009, when he fell seriously ill with a chest infection, he still remained undaunted. It is this undaunting spirit that he had that saw him through all these difficulties and helped him to continue with his work till he finally passed away on 14th of March in the year 2018. So you see, here we have an example of a person who faced serious ailments for the major part of his life and could hardly even manage doing basic functions. And yet, he could surmount them and come up with astounding work which has revolutionized the field of cosmology and quantum mechanics. So, we who are blessed with perfect health should thank God for this blessing of good health and use our faculties and skills and abilities to achieve great things in life. I end this lesson. Kindly do this given assignment in your books, in the 100 pages single line books that you are maintaining for all the assignments that have been given to you so far after each lesson. Thank you, girls. Take care and have a nice day.